Like all intermediates introduced in the 1960s, the Chevrolet Chevelle lost its high-compression V8 engines in the early 1970s. Chevrolet kept the nameplate in production through 1977, but the third-gen model that debuted in 1973 was a massive departure from the beefed-up big block cars offered only 3 years prior. 1970 marked the arrival of the 454 cubic inch, 7.4-liter V8 in both LS5 and LS6 guises. The LS5 delivered 360 horsepower, which made it slightly less potent than the range-topping iteration of the SS396, which displaced 402 cubic inches /6.6 liters that year. However, the LS6 came with a massive 450 horsepower on tap, which made it the most potent factory V8 of the era. While the LS5 remained in production in 1971, the LS6 was dropped after only 1 year. The 402 V8 also remained in production, but both engines were now marketed with SAE net figures of 260 and 285 horsepower. In 1972, the 454 V8's rating dropped to 270 horsepower. The following year, Chevrolet debuted the all-new third-generation Chevelle. Heavily redesigned inside and out to meet new safety standards, the Chevelle retained the range-topping 454 cubic inch V8, but oomph dropped to 245 horsepower. By 1977, the Chevelle had become an inline-six and small-block V8 affair with up to only 170 horsepower. But even though it was a disappointing vehicle performance-wise, the third-gen Chevelle wasn't a bad car. With around 1.7 million units sold, it remained one of Chevrolet's bread-and-butter automobiles. It's just that classic car enthusiasts aren't particularly fond of this iteration today. This 1973 coupe, however, is not a common sight. Chevrolet may have built over 150,000 two-door coupes that year, but this specific example is part of a very select group due to its original destination. Powered by a 454 cubic inch V8 paired with a 4-speed manual gearbox, it's one of only 8 units sold north of the border. Yup, it's a Canada-Spec Chevelle. The coupe was recently retrieved from long-term storage. It had been parked in 1992, when the first owner passed away with only 58,000 miles, 93,342 kilometers, on the odo, so it's also a relatively low-mileage classic. Our host recently inherited the vehicle, and he's determined to make it roadworthy again. He has already removed the mold spots that plagued the interior and cleaned the gold paint. The Chevelle appears to be in good condition for a classic that has been stored for decades. One of the rear fenders is dented and rusty, but that's a small issue for a car that hasn't seen daylight in over 30 years. The same goes for the master cylinder, which needs to be replaced. The engine is reportedly factory original, and that's the best news you can get when it comes to a solid classic. The mill has been refreshed in the past, so it's also in good shape. The 4-speed manual is good news, too, because most classic car enthusiasts prefer the row-your-own 3-pedal setup. The Chevelle relies on the most potent power plant available in 1973. The 454 V8 came with 245 horsepower and 375 pound-feet, 509 newton-meters of torque. Both were net figures, so the coupe could still cover the quarter-mile in under 16 seconds. Although it's not a particularly desirable version of the Chevelle, this Chevy is a cool classic, and the very low production number may be worth something in the future. For now, it's a Canada-Spec car that most of us may never see in person. But to truly understand why this particular Chevelle carries such fascination today, it's important to place it within the broader timeline of American automotive history. The Chevelle nameplate was once the symbol of the golden age of muscle cars, an era when displacement was king, speed was glorified, and the highway was a playground of raw mechanical force. In the late 1960s and very early 1970s, car manufacturers were in an escalating horsepower war. Chevrolet, Pontiac, Dodge, Plymouth, Ford, every brand was pushing for the next leap in displacement, airflow, compression, and carburation. The Chevelle SS, particularly the ones equipped with big block power plants, became legends not only on the street, but on drag strips across North America. The LS6 454 was a monster that lived in the imagination of every young enthusiast who heard its exhaust crackle through the crisp morning air at a local hangout. It was a car that could shrug off the competition effortlessly. A stock LS6 Chevelle could run quarter-mile times in the low 13ths, putting it in the same performance territory as far more expensive European sports cars. However, this era was not to last. In the early 1970s, the automotive landscape changed rapidly and dramatically. Insurance companies began penalizing high-powered cars, making them more expensive to own. Federal regulators imposed new safety and emissions requirements. Gasoline saw rising prices and new environmental restrictions. Drivers, lawmakers, insurers, and automakers collided in a way that forced the muscle car era to wind down. The Chevelle was caught in that transition. By 1973, when the third generation emerged, the priorities had shifted. Safety over speed, fuel efficiency over brute output. The styling became more rounded, the body heavier, and the engines more restrictive. Enthusiasts viewed these changes as a retreat from glory. For many, the Chevelle was never the same after 1972. Yet, time has a way of reshaping perception. What was once dismissed as the decline of a legend is now viewed through the lens of rarity, historical value, and nostalgia. This is where the Canada-Spec 1973 Chevelle enters the conversation. This is not merely a car from the transitional era. It is a time capsule, one that captures an intersection of circumstances rarely seen today. Being one of only 8 Chevelles equipped with both the 454 big block and a 4-speed manual built for the Canadian market, the coupe represents scarcity in the truest sense. Many muscle cars have rarity determined by trim lines, paint codes, or regional production figures. But this Chevelle's rarity is tied to geography, drivetrain, documentation, and survival. Most of the few produced would have been driven hard, modified, raced, or eventually scrapped during economic downturns or the inconvenience of storing a large two-door vehicle that fell out of fashion. The fact that this one was preserved, unintentionally, through being parked after the owner's passing creates the kind of authentic preservation narrative that collectors passionately seek. Cars like this are not just machines. They are family artifacts. They carry the dust of time, the scent of old gasoline, and the fingerprints of the people who cared for them. When a car sits silent for decades, it becomes a memory frozen in metal. Reviving it is like awakening a story that paused mid-sentence. The current owner's commitment to bringing it back to roadworthy condition is part restoration, part tribute. He is not building a show car or transforming it into a modified street machine. He is reviving what was already there, respecting its originality, its scars, its age. When he scrubbed away the mold from the seats and buffed the gold paint to reveal its metallic warmth again, he wasn't just cleaning a car. He was restoring dignity. The small issues like the dented rear fender and failing master cylinder are reminders of years untouched. But these flaws do not detract from its appeal. They enhance it. They testify to real history, storage, climate, and the quiet passage of time. A restored car that has been sanded, painted, and polished until it resembles a modern museum piece may be beautiful, but an original car with honest wear possesses authenticity that cannot be replicated. Collectors today increasingly value originality, patina, and unaltered condition because these things represent truth. Anyone with enough money can restore a car. But a car that has survived in nearly original condition for half a century is finite, an irreplaceable survivor. The 454 engine itself, while detuned from its earlier glory, is still a formidable power plant. Its torque delivery is immediate and forceful, the kind of low-end grunt that makes even casual throttle input feel substantial. Paired with the 4-speed manual, the driving experience becomes interactive, demanding, and rewarding. Modern cars provide speed effortlessly, but the Chevelle asks the driver to participate. Every shift is an engagement of muscle memory, timing, and mechanical awareness. The engine's rhythm, the clutch's bite, the feedback from the shifter, all of it makes the car feel alive. Driving a machine like this is less about performance numbers and more about sensation, sound, and connection. In its own time, the 1973 Chevelle with the 454 and manual transmission may have been overshadowed by its predecessors. But today, context has shifted. Its rarity and preserved condition give it a new kind of value, one rooted not only in horsepower or styling, but in its story and the road it has traveled through history. It stands as a reminder that the evolution of the muscle car was not a simple rise and fall. It was a living process shaped by society, technology, and the individuals who owned and cared for these vehicles. This Chevelle is no longer just a machine. It is a piece of the story of American automotive culture. One preserved against the odds. One that survived when so many others were lost. And somewhere, soon, when its engine fires and its tires roll forward for the first time in decades, that story will continue. And perhaps the most emotional layer to this Chevelle's story is not found in factory codes, horsepower statistics, or production rarity. It lies in the human connection tied to it. Cars like this are more than the sum of stamped metal panels and rotating mechanical assemblies. They carry pieces of the people who owned them, the era that shaped them, and the moments of life that happened around them. When the original owner parked the Chevelle in 1992, he did not know it would be the last time the key would turn in the ignition. Life simply stopped, quietly, without ceremony. The engine cooled for the final time, the tires settled into the concrete floor, and the car entered a long slumber, suspended in memory. For years it waited, unseen, untouched, and unspoken. Dust settled like a soft blanket, the garage air thick with stillness. Outside, the world changed. Trends shifted, new generations grew up, entire industries evolved. But the Chevelle remained a preserved fragment of the past, frozen at the moment its story paused. When the new owner, now the inheritor of this legacy, opened the door to the garage again, he was not just opening an old storage space. He was stepping into the presence of someone who was no longer there. The scent of old vinyl, the texture of the steering wheel, the way the seat springs creaked under weight, all of it echoed with memory. Cleaning the mold, polishing the paint, replacing parts. These were not chores, they were acts of care. It was like reaching backward in time, touching the past with hands of the present. And when the engine runs again, whether it coughs to life slowly or roars awake with strength, it will feel less like mechanical operation and more like a heartbeat returning. A revival, a continuation of a life paused but never forgotten. This Chevelle is not perfect, and it does not need to be. Its imperfections are traces of the roads it traveled and the years it endured. Its value is not merely in rarity or performance, but in the quiet emotional truth it carries. That some machines become storytellers. Some engines remember the hands that built them, the minds that dreamed them, and the hearts that loved them. When this car rolls back into the sunlight, it will not just be a revival of old horsepower. It will be a reunion with history, with memory, and with all the pieces of life that linger long after the engine stops.